Hello everyone! It's been quite a while since the last Q&A, and right now I have about 2500 questions stored on Ask.fm. That's an insane amount. Thank you all for taking the time to send those questions in. In the future, you can just leave a comment on the video and I'll use a combination of Ask.fm and the comments to get all my questions. With that out of the way, let's begin this Q&A. I'm just going to summarize this question, and basically what he's asking is, where do classes get their powers from? I'm just going to assume that you want to know where each class gets their power from, and I've done my best to find the answer for you, but some classes have a very vague description as to where their powers come from. If anything that I say is wrong, please feel free to correct me. Druids draw their power from nature, and their attunement to the animal spirits of Azeroth allow them to shapeshift. They can ask the world itself to give them aid, or they can use nature's own weapons. For example, in the novel War of the Ancients, Malfurion draws upon the power of nature to heal Corialstros, the red dragon. He asked the world to give what it could, and as a result, he drained the area around him of nearly all life. He also used seeds that if you inhaled them they would burn you from the inside, or spiky ones that enlarged themselves and did terrible damage to the demonic forces. Druids also cross powers with shamans, since they can also ask the winds to blow harder or ask rain to fall, but they don't directly communicate with the elements. The priests draw upon the holy light for their powers, and each race has their own philosophy as to where their powers come from. I've done a full video on the light in World of Warcraft, and if you want to know the difference for each race, you can check out that video. But the key to the holy light is that it's never forced. The ones who wield the light, they ask for it or they pray for it, and if their conviction is strong enough, if they can focus and believe what they do is right, then the light will respond. There's only one known case where the light was forced to obey, and this was done by the Blood Elves. They had captured the Naru named Muru, and they forced him to give up his powers, but he didn't give it up without a fight. Each time that they used the light, it caused them terrible headaches. They could hear Muru screaming inside their minds, and some of them actually went mad. Priests can also wield the shadow, and it's uncertain where or how they draw these powers. There's a known cult amongst the Forsaken called the Cult of Forgotten Shadow, who learned their ways from ancient texts, but it's unexplained how the other races managed to do it. Perhaps they copy it from this cult, perhaps the shadow is just a counterpart to the light. Hopefully, somewhere in the future, Blizzard will give us more details. The Paladins of course also draw from the Holy Light, pretty much the same as priests do, but the difference is that they combine their Holy Light with the fighting skills of a warrior. The Shamans ask the 5 elements for aid, namely earth, water, fire, air, and the spirits of the wilds. Their totems, they help them with their communication and their connection to the elements. For example, they can ask fire to stop burning down the forest, or they can ask water to cool their body. They can ask air to create tornadoes, and earth to create earthquakes and bring down buildings. The spirit of the wilds is a little bit of a vague element as to what it exactly is. Basically, it represents all life on the world, and it's the most powerful element of all. In one scenario, Thrall asked it to bring him a great white stag so he could feed his people, while in another case it gave him the wisdom to help Alexstrasza out of her depression. The key aspect of a shaman is that they ask the elements for help, and the elements decide if they want to help or not. For example, they've refused before. They refused to help the orcs slaughter the Draenei, which is why the orcs accepted the powers of the warlock. Shamans who actually force the elements to work for them are called dark shamans. They don't ask or beg the elements, they demand it, and if the elements don't listen, they'll enforce their will upon them. This forcing causes the elements agonizing pain, and if they do it long enough, the elements have no choice but to obey. They've actually posted a really cool short story about this on the WoW website, and I'll link it in the description if you want to check it out. The source of power behind the mages is the most unclear to me. I know that it began with the Well of Eternity. The Night Elves during that time they drew their arcane powers from the well, and this drew the attention of the Burning Legion. After a long war called the War of the Ancients, they destroyed the well, but the Night Elves didn't lose their powers. The powers of the well, they spread out across Azeroth, little particles of magical power, which would later empower the other races like the humans. There are also ley lines across Azeroth, and these are lines of great power, often used to empower spells. The Tower of Karazhan, Medivh's location, that one is built on top of a location where all the ley lines of Azeroth they cross each other, so that location is probably the most powerful location in Azeroth. The Warlocks are often former students of the Arcane. mages who decide to delve deeper into the darker side of their art. You also have the orc warlocks who used to be shamans, but they turned away from the elements when the elements refused to help them. They didn't receive their powers from studying the arcane, they received their powers directly from Kil'jaeden and Gul'dan. Warlock spells in the lore, they're pretty sick. They can literally suck the life out of a being, or they can magically aid you. They can directly burn your soul or have their demons torment you. Because of the evil nature of their spell, warlocks usually stay on the outside of society. You wouldn't see them just walking along using the auction house like we see it in the game. But they have been accepted within the ranks of the Horde and the Alliance. They figured that it was better to have such an evil power work for you rather than against you. Death Knights are fallen heroes from either the Alliance or the Horde. They were resurrected by the Lich King to do his fighting, but would eventually break free and turn against him. Death Knights use a different source of magic, rune magic, to power their abilities. Most mages on Azeroth can't even understand this rune magic, but they use it to heal, they use it to deal damage, they use it to corrupt. All the evil, powerful things that Death Knights do, they do it with rune magic. Another fun fact about Death Knights is that they have the need to inflict pain, otherwise they'll go mad. This is probably placed into them by the Scourge to keep them fighting, so whenever a Death Knight isn't in a war, he'll have to find something to kill, otherwise he'll go crazy, go bloodlust, and kill everything around him. The monks started out as a way to fight without the use of weapons. Way back when, the Mogu had enslaved the Pandaren and they didn't allow them to have any weapons. One day a Pandaren had enough of the slavery, enough of the torment. He decided enough was enough. He stood up and used some kick-ass kung fu moves against the Mogu and he liberated his brothers and sisters. They don't really have a source of power behind them, except for their own chi, and the Mistweaver monks draw their healing powers from the mist. The warriors are skilled fighters who don't really have a source of power. They draw upon their own strength and their own training. The same goes for rogues, they are very skilled, but no source of power but their own. Hunters have a strong bond with their animal companions, but again no source of power that's fueling them. Hello Noble, I have a question about the skull of Gul'dan and I was hoping you could answer me. So I know that Gul'dan died in the tomb of Sargeras, but the thing that bugs me is how did the Dreadlord that was killed by Illidan get his hands on the skull? After Gul'dan's death, no one entered the tomb. It's a very good question, and it looks like the skull of Gul'dan is very mysterious. It almost looks like it has the power to travel on its own and always find its way back into the story. You're right about Gul'dan dying in the tomb of Sargeras, but the next time that we see the skull is not with Illidan. Before that moment, it pops up on Draenor again. The story behind it is that when the Horde was defeated for the first time, the Alliance they closed the portal. Tirion Fordring, he came up with a plan of invading different planets, and to do this they would have to visit Azeroth again. On Azeroth there were several powerful magical artifacts and they needed these to open up these portals. In order to open up the dark portal again and get to Azeroth, they would have to get the skull of Gul'dan. The skull was first found by one of Gul'dan's warlocks who survived the tomb of Sargeras. Believe it or not, there was actually a survivor. That warlock was killed by another warrior and eventually the skull made its way to Hyrkan Skullsplinter. Hyrkan was the chieftain of the Bone Chewer clan and Grom Hellscream was put on the task of collecting the skull, and to do this he had to kill Hyrkan. When they had the skull, they opened the portal and they went on their mission of collecting the artifacts. Later on in the story, Deathwing teams up with the orcs, he meets with Ner'zhul on Draenor and he asks for the skull. He probably recognized the immense power from it, and you don't refuse someone like Deathwing, so he got the skull and he took it with him. The Alliance, they followed the Horde back to Draenor to stop them once and for all, and to do this, they wanted to close the dark portal, so they had to get the skull of Gul'dan. They traced its magic, they found Deathwing, and together with Gruul the Dragon Slayer, they took him on and retrieved the skull. Khadgar used the skull to close the portal again, but before it was completely closed, he gave the skull to a dwarf who took it back to Azeroth with his hippogriff. Now somehow, someway, the skull ended up in Felwood, and this is the moment where we see Illidan absorbing its powers and killing Tychondrius. He takes the skull with him all the way to the Black Temple, and is uncertain what happened to it when we killed Illidan. You can actually loot the skull as a trinket, but I highly doubt that that's what happened to it lore-wise. The skull of Gul'dan has played such a huge part in the story already, I can't see them keeping the skull out of it. Maybe this is the item that's going to help Garrosh create a new dark portal on Ironhoard Draenor. Who knows what's going to happen, but I highly doubt that we've seen the last of the skull of Gul'dan. Hey Noble, love your videos man. I have a question about Tirion. In your last video you said Uther exiled him and took away his powers because he befriended the orc. So the question is, the last DK starter quest when we fight Tirion, how did he get his powers back? As I explained in my video about the Holy Light, the light is wielded mostly by someone's conviction in what they're doing. If they believe what they're doing is the right thing, then the light will answer. So far, there's only been one scenario where the light was actually ripped away, and that was during the war between the Draenei and the Orcs. During that war, there was a strange red mist that disconnected the Draenei from the Holy Light. Apparently, this is some strange chemical weapon that the Legion has in their arsenal, and they've only used it in that one situation. So it is possible, but that's not what happened to Tirion. Once Uther excommunicated him, Tirion decided that he still wanted to rescue Eitrigg. Thrall and his troops, they showed up to rescue Eitrigg as well, but Tirion got to him first and he dragged him away from the town. He then tried to heal Eitrigg's wounds because the interrogators, they were not soft on the orc, they pretty much beat him up to a little pulp, and he tried to wield the Holy Light to heal Eitrigg again. At first, the doubt in his heart blocked him from the light. At first he believed that he was actually disconnected from it. But then his conviction, knowing that nobody could take away the light, that it was a part of him, this allowed him to communicate and channel the light once more. I'm definitely going to do a full story on Tirion, especially since his Holy Light uncorrupted the Ashbringer, but that's something for in the future. Hey Noble, what or who reopened the Dark Portal? I think you mean during the Burning Crusade, but I'll just tell you the history of the Dark Portal. The first time that they opened it was a combination of Gul'dan and Medivh, while Medivh was under the control of Sargeras. That portal was closed by Khadgar and later reopened by Ner'zhul with the skull of Gul'dan. Again, Khadgar closed the Dark Portal with the skull of Gul'dan, and this time it was closed until the Burning Crusade. During that time, Lord Kazak, a demon left behind after the Third War, he had only one goal in mind: reopening the Dark Portal. He found some sort of relic of the past. They didn't exactly explain what relic, and he used this to achieve his goal. Unfortunately, lore during the Burning Crusade was pretty bad, and this is the only explanation that they've given. A demon was somehow left behind on Azeroth and was somehow able to wander around. He found an artifact and he somehow opened up the portal. Despite Nedergaard keeping an eye on the damn portal, he was able to open up the portal, start a new invasion, and we had to go and do the Burning Crusade. Apparently, we were not prepared. Hey Noble. If the Eredar were such a highly developed race worshipping the light, how come they so quickly went from the light to the Burning Legion? This doesn't make much sense to me. For such a holy and divine race, this seems like a rapid turnaround of pretty much everything they stand for. I can understand the confusion, but what you need to know is that the Eredar, they were not worshipping the light when Sargeras showed up. They were extremely powerful beings and they mainly used magic, but the Holy Light was not part of their culture. That part was added later. When the Naaru showed up, they saved the Draenei. That's when they started to say things like the Naaru have not forgotten us and the Holy Light will save us. That's the moment when they started to worship the light. So Eredar, Kil'jaeden and Archimonde, not so much about the light. Velen and the Draenei, they were about the light. Hey Noble, my question is about the Highborne Night Elf mages in-game. Night Elf mages are Highborne, right? So why were the Highborne allowed back into Night Elven society? I get your question, and the main reason is because Blizzard wanted to add a new class to the Night Elves. I could explain the lore reason, with Highborne promising to be good from now on and not accidentally summoning the Burning Legion again, but it's pure bullshit. Lore-wise, it's a very silly choice to add mages to the Night Elves again, no matter how you want to explain it. How do you go from making magic punishable by death, imprisoning Illidan for 10,000 years, to the moment that you say, yeah sure, come back in, train the other Night Elves how to wield magic. We're perfectly fine with that now. That's absolutely ridiculous. To your question, the Highborne are the ones who are teaching the Night Elves how to wield magic again. So they're not only Highborne, they're also Night Elf mages again. Hello Noble, I'm a noob at WoW's lore and I would like to know how did the Horde is born? Why the Tauren have joined the Orcs? And my final question, what was the background of the Tauren before the Orcs invaded Azeroth? Your last question is a little bit too big to cover in this Q&A, since the Taurens have been around for quite a while. I'm going to do a video on them specific, but what I can tell you right now is they've been around several 10,000s of years. They were there during the War of the Ancients. Apparently they were the ones who Cenarius first taught in the ways of the Druids, but they forgot it again. It's an entire big storyline that we'll cover. But your other question as to how the Horde as it is today came to be, well, it began with Thrall. And he was raised by the human Aedaeus Blackmoor. Blackmoor had Thrall fighting for him as a gladiator, but his end goal was to use Thrall to lead the orcs who were imprisoned within the internment camps. He wanted to betray all the other humans and rule the world, but he treated Thrall so bad that Thrall escaped and eventually found the clan of his parents, the Frostwolf clan. He was the first orc in many years to work with the elements again, and he used that power to liberate the remaining orcs and reform the Horde. Former Warchief Doomhammer joined him on this his mission, but during these liberations he was killed and he gave the title of War Chief to Thrall. He also gave him his black armor and the mighty weapon Doomhammer. After this entire storyline where Thrall reformed the Horde, he received a visit from the Prophet Medivh and he told him in a dream that he had to sail west to Kalimdor. A big storm forced them to take shelter on an island and there they met with Sen'jin, who's Vol'jin's father. Sen'jin and the orcs, they got kidnapped by some murlocs, Sen'jin was sacrificed and Thrall offered the remaining Darkspear trolls, who were now led by Vol'jin, a place within his Horde. They met the Taurens and Cairn in Kalimdor. Thrall told Cairn that he was seeking his destiny, and Cairn told him that an oracle lived far to the north. Thrall helped him with protecting his caravan, protecting his village against the centaur, and eventually Cairn helped him with finding the oracle and fighting the Legion. Sylvanas had become the leader of the Forsaken, but on their own they would be a very easy target, so Sylvanas had sent out emissaries to look for new allies. The kind-hearted Tauren of Thunderbluff proved to be the most promising contact. Specifically, Archdruid Hamuruntotem saw the potential for redemption in Sylvanas' people, even though he was fully aware of the Forsaken's sinister nature. Thus, the Tauren convinced War Chief Thrall, despite his misgivings, to forge an alliance of convenience between the Forsaken and the Horde. In the end, the Forsaken's chances of victory against the Lich King were bolstered, while the Horde gained an invaluable foothold in the Eastern Kingdoms. This is the explanation from the WoW website. So Sylvanas, she sent out some messengers like, do you want to help us? Do you want to help us? I know we look like Scourge, but we're not that bad. And in the end, Hamuruntotem together with Thrall, they answered the call and they led the Forsaken into the Horde. The Blood Elves joined during the Burning Crusade, and the Blood Elf story again is huge. It's complicated and a little bit strange. The short version is that the Blood Elves were still pissed about what happened between Garithos and Kil'Thuzad during Warcraft 3. And for some reason, the Alliance had sent spies which were discovered by the Blood Elves. In the meantime, the Horde and especially Sylvanas had offered them help, and they needed the Horde, so they became the new ally. The Goblins of Khazan joined the party during the Cataclysm, since Deathwing blew up their island. This forced them to flee their home, and they met a couple of orcs who were really nice, while the Alliance, they blew up their ship and they were not so nice. At the end of the questline, they found Thrall, who was captured by the Alliance, they saved him, and he offered them a spot within the Horde and a land to call their own. For those who wonder what about the Alliance, well, the first Alliance was called the Alliance of Lordaeron, which was created to fight back the original Horde during the Second War. By this time the Horde had already taken Stormwind, and the survivors had fled to Lordaeron to warn them about the threat of the Horde. The human kingdoms, amongst them Lordaeron, Dalaran and Gilneas, they decided to put their forces together and they formed an alliance against the Horde. During the war, the orcs, they attacked the Wildhammer and the Bronzebeard clan, the dwarven clans. The Alliance, they helped them out, and the dwarves decided to join them. The Bronzebeard clan would remain within the Alliance, while the Wildhammer clan had no love for the Horde, but technically they were neutral and not part of the Alliance. The gnomes, they were close friends with the dwarves, they even shared the land of Casmodan, so they decided to help the Alliance by offering their technology. One of their greatest inventions was the tram between Ironforge and Stormwind. These were the original races within the Alliance. They also had the High Elves, but they would later turn into the Blood Elves and join the Horde. Now a few years later, during the events of Warcraft 3, Jaina Proudmoore teamed up with Thrall and the Night Elves to fight against the Legion. Orcs and humans at the time, they were not meant to be allies. They tried, they had a summit at Fedamore, wasn't meant to be, but the Night Elves, led by Tyrande, decided to stick around. The Draenei joined the Alliance during the Burning Crusade. When they escaped Outland, they had to make a crash landing on Azeroth, and as luck would have it, they were found by the Night Elves first, who offered them a spot within the Alliance. At the same time, joining the Horde was also not really an option, since both the Orcs and the Blood Elves had attacked them before. That would never work. During the Cataclysm, we got 3 new factions within the Alliance: the Wildhammer clan, the Dark Iron clan, and the Worgen. The Dark Iron Dwarves were led by Moira Bronzebeard, and Moira's father is King Magni Bronzebeard. Magni tried to use an ancient ritual to communicate with the land of Azeroth and find out what was going on. This was just before the Cataclysm, so the land was in turmoil, it was shaking all around them. They wanted to find out what was going on, but the ritual backfired. Instead of communicating with the land, he actually became one with the land. He returned to his original earthen state, he turned into a crystal. This left the dwarves of Ironforge leaderless, which was a great opportunity for Moira to come in and take control. Technically speaking, she was actually the one to receive the throne after Magni's demise, so by law she had a claim to the throne. This caused a whole riot within Ironforge, with the Dark Iron Dwarves not liking the other dwarves not liking the Dark Irons, Anduin got kidnapped, Varian nearly killed Moira, but in the end they decided to rule Ironforge with the Council of 3 Hammers. A council where each clan had a voice. Accepting the Worgen within the Alliance wasn't that easy. At that time, Tirion and Malfurion, they summoned all the leaders of the different factions to discuss the future of the Alliance. The world was changing with the Cataclysm. Deathwing was a huge threat, and at the same time the Horde was now led by Garrosh instead of Thrall. With all these changes, something had to be done. The Alliance had to come together. So Tirion and Malfurion, they suggested to appoint one person as their leader. In a vision, Tirion had seen Varian to be that one leader, but he couldn't get over his hatred of the Gilnean. Gilneans, they had given their support in the war against the Horde. They were part of the original alliance of Lordaeron, but they did this reluctantly. Jen Greymane thought that his own troops would be plenty to defend his own people, so after the second war they raised a huge wall around their kingdom, closing it off from anything and anyone. Even when the plague spread across the land, they kept their gates closed, refusing any aid to the people of Lordaeron. To fight off the Scourge, Greymane had his archmage Arugal unleash a secret weapon, namely the Worgen. When the Worgen were done with the Scourge, they turned around and they attacked his own people. They bite them, they killed them, they infected them with the Worgen curse, turning them into the beasts. The Cataclysm destroyed their pretty wall. The Forsaken took the opportunity to attack their city, so the Gilnean had to flee. The Night Elves offered them a way to handle their Worgen curse, and they tried to get them into the Alliance. Like I said, at first, Varian didn't want anything to do with them. He saw them as betrayers, he saw them as selfish, arrogant people. He didn't want them in his alliance. It wasn't until after the events in Wolfheart where Varian got in touch with his Logash side, his wolf side. He led the Worgen against the Horde, they had a huge victory. He took the job as High King of the Alliance and he allowed the Worgen to join. The Pandaren are a neutral faction at first, and when they have to make a choice between the Horde or Alliance, it's more about their way of life. If they enjoyed action over thinking, they'll join the Horde, and if they like thinking more than action, they'll join the Alliance. This is going to be my final question. I want to read the Warcraft books. In what order should I read them? I get this question all the time, and I'll place a link in the description which will take you to a forum post with all the novels in their chronological order. My advice for anyone who wants to begin with reading the novels would be either to start with War of the Ancients or with Rise of the Horde. War of the Ancients is a trilogy, so it's 3 books in one, which makes it pretty thick, but it's also the earliest lore that you can find, besides Dawn of the Aspects. It tells about the Well of Eternity, the Night Elves, Burning Legion, dragons, a big ass war. It's a pretty damn cool story if you don't mind the time travel. The novel Rise of the Horde tells about how the first Horde came to be, how the orcs ended up at war with the Draenei, and how that all flowed into the Warcraft games. It's a great novel to begin with, especially since it's written by Gul'dan, which is my favorite author for the Warcraft novels, and it also ties into the next expansion, Warlords of Draenor. So if you want to know what life was like back then on Draenor, if you want to get ready for the expansion, I'd recommend that novel. Like I said, if you want more information, I'll place the links in the description and you can check out the entire list. With that, I'm going to end this Q&A. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please leave a comment, subscribe if you like my videos, and until next time guys, see ya!